Hey, what's up? I'm Darkbblue, trying to help you enjoy games in depth. In the previous video, we've talked how to theory craft in Hellcloud. Now with a build in mind, it's time to actually implement it. This relates to farming and crafting. Let's first go through all the build components in this game. For meta progression, we have Relics, Blessed Gears, the Great Bell, Constellations, and Skill Selection. For in-run progression, we have Blessings of Proficiency and Blessings of Foundation. Among them, Relic is the single most important thing in this game, and we will use most content of this video to explain it. For everything other than Relics, I'll go through them in this section briefly. The bell layout is well organized. Top middle is in-run and meta progression nodes like Gold Game. Bottom middle is offense nodes with some crit nodes to its left. Bottom right is life nodes, bottom left is evasion and attack speed. The rightmost nodes are resistance and the leftmost nodes are mana related. Usually you want to max out the middle section, spec a bit into resistance, then the crit, life, evasion, mana nodes should be taken based on how your build works. You can respec the bell for a very low price, so low that I often wonder why not just make it free. Then Constellations. In the campaign mode, the total number of constellation points is 46. Initially, most clusters are locked. You need to gain more affinity points by completing full clusters. Note that sometimes the completion reward of a cluster can support the requirement of itself. In this case, you can safely unspec some previous clusters that allowed you to reach this cluster in order to save some points. Similar to the bell, respecing constellations is very cheap. When you respec, I suggest not clicking on the confirm button until you finish the entire constellation allocation. In this way, you won't be paying extra respecing fees for unspecking some clusters when doing the self-supporting thing. For skill selection, what you need to care about is the skill levels. You want to max your main damage dealer's level for higher damage, but for supporting skills, it might not be a good idea to always max the level. This is because a higher level skill often has longer cooldown, hence you need to select a suitable level. Then in-run progression. For Blessings of Proficiency, note one thing. Proficiency blessings are divided into white, blue, yellow, and red rarities. The available slots for each rarity is limited, so if you roll a high rarity blessing that is not the correct stat, do not pick it. Note another thing. Look at the bottom part of the skill panel. As you pick more blessings for a skill, you also gain a global stat bonus. Certain skills, such as Phantom Marksman and Spectral Knives, even give you global multiplicative damage bonus, which is quite juicy. Then we have Blessings of Foundation. Showing up as a totem at the end of each floor, you need gold to purchase them. It may look random, but in fact, the Foundation Blessings follow exactly the 6 trees as shown right now. Therefore, you can plan ahead which tree you want to focus on. Now with the small things done, it's time for the big things, how to farm relics. You need to first know that relics are divided into uniques and rares. They work differently, and should be farmed in different ways. Here we first go through uniques. To farm uniques, you want to spend lots of gold rerolling the Blessings of Legacy rewards given after survival fights and boss fights, until you find what you need. But to maximize your efficiency, it's important that you learn Relic Affinity. Look at this. On the top left corner of the constellation menu, you can see the so-called affinity points of the 3 colors. You earn more affinity points by completing a full constellation cluster. Besides unlocking new clusters, these points have another use. They can affect how uniques drop in 2 ways. First, a part of uniques, usually uber uniques, have a minimum affinity requirement. If it's not met, they won't drop at all. Second, each unique has at least 1 affinity color. If your affinity points satisfy, one color's points is more than the other two's, and is at least 4 points. Then the uniques having affinity with this color will get 100% bonus drop chance. Some information sources also say the more the color's point is, the extra bonus you receive, but I'm not 100% sure about this. So how could we know affinity requirement and affinity color? Well, they are not shown anywhere in-game. You need to go to this web page. In general, you need to first check the requirement and affinity of the uniques you want, then respec your constellation so that you can meet the requirement and get the drop chance bonus. Since this might weaken your build, you can go back to easier nightmare tiers, but you want to keep it at least T9 or New Game Plus 2, otherwise the T4 relics will become less common. To further optimize the efficiency, an important thing is to run endless nightmares, rather than the base campaign chapters. This is a new endgame mode introduced with the Nightmare Journey, only accessible if you have this journey turned on when creating the save file. We can expect similar endgame modes with other journeys that hopefully will be added in the future. Endless nightmares work like this. Compared to campaign chapters, nightmare rounds will introduce additional 3-fold modifiers per 7 floors. The first modifier is Shard of Location, which is almost pure debuff, but applies only to the following 7 floors. The only affix that's not pure debuff is adding one more boss to the boss fight. This will add one more Blessings of Legacy drop, so it's always the best choice. The second modifier is Shard of Hope, giving you all kinds of buffs. You want to grab meta progression or gold game bonus. The third modifier is Shard of Fear, giving you debuffs. Usually we want in-run debuffs, trying to avoid meta debuffs. Note that Shards of Hope and Fear stack, lasting for all the 21 floors, which is different from Shards of Location that only affect the following 7 floors. Furthermore, as you go to higher tier nightmares, the number of Shards of Hope or Fear affix increases, capping at 3. At T11, you get 3 affixes on every shard choice. If the tier goes further up, some shard affix will be replaced by greater ones. Greater hope affixes are not simply higher value versions, instead, they give you some special effects, such as a guaranteed Divine 2 drop from the final boss. Greater affixes start to appear at T12, but there's only one great affix across all the 3 shard selection. If you further go into T13+, more affixes will be replaced with greater affixes, but the run will also become much harder. Now if your goal is to farm uniques, use the following strategy. Choose T11, because at this tier, you have max affix count and no greater affix that is useless for our purpose. Grab gold gain and red portal chance from Shards of Hope. When you run the maps, take red portals as much as possible, but don't skip the survival fights at floor 7, 10, and 17. In this way, you can get Blessings of Legacy more efficiently. Next, it's time for rares. The best way to farm rares is to exploit Blessings of the Future. The totem at the end of each floor has a chance to be replaced by a totem of future, where I feel the deeper you go in one run, the higher the replacement chance. Sometimes the totem sells blessed gears and sometimes relics. What we want is relics. You'll notice that each time you reroll the reward, 3 rares and 1 unique are provided. In this way, you can fish for good rares by rerolling. But wait, what exactly is a good rare? This relates to the shape of relics. For uniques, the core affix is tied to its shape. For example, I'm using a unique saying more repeater damage against slowed enemies. This affix always appears on 1 slot uniques. But rares are different. On one hand, if you manually craft a magic relic into a rare relic, the core affix can roll only from a shape-specific pool. But on the other hand, if a rare is naturally dropped, it can roll any core affix. This means the smaller rares we have, the more core affixes we can fit into the limited relic slots. So we are hunting for smaller, naturally dropped rares. But it's not a good idea to use 1 slot rares only. That's because 1 slot rares has only secondary affix but no primary affix. and their imbuement affix rolls are mostly defensive. Therefore, we are looking for a mixture of 1 slot and 2 slot rares that are naturally dropped, trying to shrink the number of 4 slot rares. Then, the nightmare strategy for rare farming. Choose T11, grab Totem of the Future Chance and gold gain from Shards of Hope. You can take a few red portals in early floors, but avoid them in the later half of the round. In this way, you'll encounter more totems, therefore more totems of the future. If you are to craft relics, you need more than base relics. You also need crafting tools. At the time of making this video, what's mostly needed is divine tools and imbuement tools. So before we start talking how to craft, let's first cover how to farm the 2 kinds of tools. To farm divine tools, you want to grab guaranteed divine tool drop from Greater Hope affix as much as possible, so you want as high tier nightmare as possible to maximize the number of greater affix. You also want to grab some soulstone gun affix to compensate for the soulstone cost of rerolling to fish for the divine tool affix. When in round, take every red portal to go to the final boss in the fastest possible way. To farm imbuement tools, you have 2 methods, but both of them are best performed at T11, and both of them require you to clear the entire floor, especially elites. This is because 2 drop from bosses isn't significantly more than 2 drop from elites. The first method is to grab 2 drop chance and drop quantity affix. The second method is to grab imbued relic chance, and drop quantity, later recycling imbued relics for tools. You can mix the 2 methods in practice. Also, I believe the current imbuement to drop quantity is just too low at the first place. Let's hope the devs could do something to this in the future. Now with all the preparation done, it's finally the time for crafting. From a macro perspective, you want to craft larger relics first, and then smaller relics. This is because larger relics have more affixes, making it harder to roll certain combinations. If you roll larger relics first, most resistance combination could do. You can make finer grain adjustments later when crafting smaller relics. Next, the exact 3 steps to craft a certain relic. Rolling explicit affixes, imbuing, and divining or crafting. To roll explicit affixes, you can use tinkering tools to replace a random affix, and use locksmith tool to randomly lock an affix. Besides this, you should know that explicit affixes in Hellclock divides into primary and secondary affix, rolling from 2 separate pools, basically like prefix and suffix. For the exact affix pool, you can check out this wiki page. 1 slot relics have only secondary affix, and 4 slot rares have 2 primary affixes. All the other relics have 1 primary affix and a number of secondary affixes. Next, to imbue a relic, you can spam the 3 imbuement tools until your roll was needed. You can check this webpage for the imbuement affix pool. Now here's some common practice. For 4 slot relics, the best choice is often flat damage bonus of a certain damage type, since this is almost the only source of flat damage bonus, rendering it very rewarding. However, if you are playing a marksman build, with this constellation note that Agility Orb offers multiplicative damage bonus, it might be better to just roll +1 max Agility Orb instead. For 2 slot relics, the most common choice is damage type bonus or skill type bonus. For 1 slot relics, the common choice is defense stats like endurance and evasion and life or mana. Into the last step, let's first talk divining. You can notice that most affix on the relic has a rolling range. Therefore, most time what you are using right now cannot hit the max range. This is when divine tools come into use. It can increase the value of all the affix by random margins. Now know 3 things. First, if you're familiar with divine orbs in Path of Exile, divine tools are different from them in that a divine tool always increases the values where only the margin is random. And 2, you can spam divines until a relic hits max roll. there's no limit in how many divines you can use on the relic. And 3. Divining the relic, in fact, can make its rolling exceed the max range a bit. Then, when corrupting the relic, there can be 4 effects, all happening randomly with the uniform chance. 1. No effect at all, and 2. Equal to applying multiple divine tools, 3. Equal to applying multiple tinkering tools, and 4. Adding a new corruption affix. No matter which one happens, the relic will be locked. No further crafting other than upgrading can be done to it. What we want here is the final effect. The first 2 effects are quite useless, but at least safe. The real risk is the third effect, as it can really ruin your relic. However, there's a trick to lower the risk. You can lock the most important affix before corrupting the relic, so it won't change even with effect 3. My suggestion is to divine rare relics, uber uniques, and the uniques that have very large rolling range and thus high reward from divining. For the other uniques, corrupt them. When you corrupt a relic, you should first have its explicit affix rerolled and have it imbued, then corrupt it before upgrading, so that you don't waste any soulstone. If you really want to min-max your build, you can first divine the relic and then corrupt it. But it will become super expensive. All in all, I hope this video's information could help you implement the build you have in mind. If you want to play games into depth together with me, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, see you around.